be lucky enough to watch. So I am Rabbi Marcia Tilchin. I'm the founder of the Jewish Collaborative of Orange County. The Jewish Collaborative will be marking its 10th birthday next Monday. We do a lot of different programs in the community and also nationally. This is a national program. Many of you are not only local to Orange County. We're so happy that you um, are joining us from wherever you're joining us from. And I want to say, as most of you know, many of you on the screen are people that make our programs possible through monthly or annual donations that really make a difference. I wouldn't be able to engage Shai to teach if people didn't support our work. So, what I want you to know is that in the chat, I put a link. If this is not something you've been able to do or not for a long time, I put a little donate thing. It's not a it's just that to know that you have some skin in the game if you can makes a big difference
Now,
for all of us.
or they become ill,
And
right?
so,
And
anyway,
in
I just want to say
historic
thank you for being here.
dictatorships,
And we're really excited about this class. This is Shai's last class in this series, but I can promise you that he will be back hopefully later in the fall and many other times and doing hopefully some other wonderful things with us in Orange County. He's returning to the West Coast. So I have big plans for Rabbi Shai Cherry. He doesn't know them yet, but we'll discuss those later. And I want to turn this class over to him. And I just want to say, Shai, I have learned so much from you. Thank you 1,000 times over.
Uh, it's been a pleasure. I am hesitating. Why am I hesitating? On Shabbat, we had the synagogue's goodbye party for me. And so many of the events that I have been present for since I arrived 7 years ago were funerals and shivas. And so, those weren't a pleasure, but those were a privilege. So this experience has been both a privilege and a pleasure. All right, so today we really do have a beginning, middle, and end. Today we are, excuse me, we're talking about the third component of the covenant, which is Torah and God. So this will be the most theological of our three sessions, and there is definitely a historical arc. I um, I hope that there might be little pieces here and there that will be new and informative for you. But what I'm more confident about is that this arc of what is salvageable from the different articulations of Jewish communities' concepts of God, I hope that will actually be really nourishing. And I don't think that's something that you've been exposed to before. And that's kind of my value added. And so I'm really hoping to get some feedback from you on that. Okay, let us begin this process. So this week is Parashat Korach in the diaspora, not in Israel, and not in those synagogues like mine that has sunset the second day of holidays. We only keep one day of Chagim. Rosh Hashanah is still 2 days because Rosh Hashanah is 2 days in Israel. But we are actually on Chukat this week. But you all, I believe, are on Korach. And so Korach happens in the dog days of the summer. And so a lot of people are not familiar with the Torah portion, but they might be familiar with the piece from Pirkei Avot that mentions Korach and his gang. So kol machloket shehi l'shem shamayim sofah lehitkayem. Not clear what it means. Every dispute that's for the sake of heaven, her end, sofah, is to endure. But what is enduring about a dispute for the sake of heaven? Is it the dispute that is enduring or the resolution of the dispute that is enduring? And then the foil to Hillel and Shammai as the example of a machloket l'shem shamayim is Korach and all his congregation. That is a controversy that is not for the sake of heaven. So it is clear that today's topic is a dispute for the sake of heaven. And each of the resolutions that we are going to look at have not endured. But the controversy, the dispute itself about what is the nature of God and how can we have any kind of idea about that nature, and does God have any kind of influence on God's creatures, that is the subject of discussion or the subject of dispute that has endured throughout Jewish history. And at the very beginning of the Torah, I believe somebody mentioned this in my first class, we are not a monotheistic people. We have not yet absorbed the idea from above, and above can be the priests or above can be God, that there is only one force in the universe. And so the most famous expression of polytheism that most Jews know is Mi kamocha be'elim Adonai. Who is like you, Adonai, amongst the Elim, amongst the gods? If you go to biblical translations in Exodus 15, it might say, who is like you amongst the mighty, who is like you amongst the strong. But Elim is the plural of El, and El is Elohim, El is God. We have one other psalm where you really have a kind of Mount Olympus-like setting, where God is standing in Mount Olympus among the gods. He pronounces judgment. The gods are not behaving the way God thinks they should be behaving. And so at the conclusion in red, I had taken you for divine beings, sons of the Most High, all of you, but I am now making you mortal, and you will die as mortal men do. You will fall like any prince. And so, at least poetically, this seems to capture the moment when our leaders, not the people in general, but our poets, our priests, our literary visionaries, imagined that we went from a polytheistic culture to a monotheistic culture. But the problem with monotheism is that there's only one God, right? I mean, I guess that's the good side of monotheism too. But the flip side is that if there's only one God, that's very restricting, right? What characterizes this one God that makes sense of the richness of the totality of our experience? Let me say that one more time. What can we say about a single God that captures the totality of our experience, that resonates with our understanding of ourselves and of the world in which we live? There we go. Okay. So in the Torah, because there are several authors to the 5 books of Moses, those authors had different theologies. The theology that is most frequently, that is most widely known, the theology that is most widely known is the theology that made it into the prayer book. If it didn't make it into the prayer book, and if it's not something that Jews say on a regular basis, but maybe read a couple of times a year if you go to synagogue, right? It's not going to be as familiar. But the Mosaic theology from the book of Deuteronomy is captured in this idea, im shmoa tishma'u el mitzvotai. If you will obey my mitzvot that I am giving you, you're going to get goodies, you're going to get rain. And if you disobey and whore after your heart and your eyes, you will get the opposite of rain, which Californians know something about. You will experience drought. And in an agricultural society, when you don't have Whole Foods and you don't have Trader Joe's and you don't have Mother's, if you don't have food, you're going to be vulnerable to the army that invades you that does have food. And there's rivers that overflow on a regular basis in the Middle East. The Fertile Crescent. They've got a predictable, reliable supply of irrigation for their agriculture, and they will cause you to soon perish from the good land that the Lord is assigning to you. So theologically, there is a reward and punishment scheme that was then bequeathed or adopted, I would say, by Christianity. This idea of rewards and punishments for depending on what you do or what you believe. Okay. But there's another very prominent theology in the Hebrew Bible that didn't get picked up by the prayer book. And as a result of it not getting picked up by the prayer book, well, it did get picked up by the prayer book, but it's not as obvious. Okay. And so even when it does appear in the prayer book, it's not transparent. So what I'm going to try to do is make this other priestly theology transparent. So I'm going to read this. I know it's a lot, but this is the other theology, and this is what you need to be able to understand is in competition with the Mosaic theology. Moral impurity results from committing certain moral acts so heinous that they are considered defiling. Such behaviors include the big three rabbinic transgressions: sexual transgressions, idolatry, and murder. These to'evot, taivas in Yiddish, these abominations bring about an impurity that morally, but not ritually, defiles the sinner, the land of Israel, the temple, the sanctuary of God. Over time, this defilement leads to the expulsion of the people from the land of Israel. Now, this is, as I said, not quite as well known as the Mosaic theology. And my next quote is going to pinpoint the very important distinction between the Mosaic theology and what I'm calling the priestly theology. Israel Knohl, one of the Bible scholars at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, writes, "The punishment for the violation of the commandments is described as a necessary consequence of sin." I might have written a natural consequence of sin, rather than the act of a personal God who punishes those who transgress God's will. Because the Israelites violated the categories of holiness, which involve keeping things separate that need to be separate in the priestly ideology, within the realms of family, human life, and covenant, God was crowded out of God's creation. We exiled God through our transgressions of the categories and the architecture that God created the world with, that kind of moral universe that I was talking about last week. When the land is morally defiled, it vomits out its inhabitants. That's the language that the priestly Torah uses, laki, to vomit out. Vomiting is not volitional, right? I understand there are pathologies where vomiting can be volitional, I understand. But in the metaphorical language of the priestly theology, when it talks about the land vomiting out the inhabitants, it's because the inhabitants have become poisonous. They have defiled themselves to the degree that the land cannot tolerate their presence and necessarily, naturally, inevitably vomits them out. The Israelites first exile God and God's protective presence. Then the land of Israel, with the help of the Babylonians, exiled the Israelites in 586 BCE with the help of the Romans in 70 CE, but this is a natural consequence of our transgressions pushing the divine away from us, which I don't know about. I mean, I think we can all agree that just about anything is better than a reward and punishment theology. But I actually find this to be very compelling. I find this to resonate with my experience. I find this to be a theology that I can teach without having to qualify it 100,000 times. It feels like that's an understanding of God and God's presence and God's influence that works. It worked 3,000 years ago. And at least for me, and I hope for many of you, that it works for you today. Okay, so now we go back to the idea of machloket l'shem shamayim, a dispute for the sake of heaven. Within every single period of Israelite history, of Jewish history, there were conflicting theologies and theodicies. A theodicy is how you explain evil and suffering in a world that is supposedly controlled by God, a good God, a just God. So in the priestly world, when evil happens, it's a natural consequence of our behavior. God's presence protects us and God's absence leaves us vulnerable. In the Mosaic theology, both in the Hebrew Bible, God's presence is independent of what we do and the sacrifices we make. God rewards our good deeds and God punishes our bad deeds through rain and drought. Carrot and stick. Which is confusing because what if you have a stick of carrots? Right? Then it just gets all saturate. Okay, I don't even want to go there. Okay. In this priestly Torah, in this priestly theology, there's a constellation of other elements that conflict with those same elements when you compare them in the Mosaic Torah. We're not going to talk about them all. Some of them are actually quite complicated, but this is not. So in the Middle Ages, you had a dispute about whether words were essential or instrumental, conventional. So does the word table, do we just agree that it refers to this thing usually with, 3 or more legs and a surface and you put stuff on? Is that just a linguistic convention or an agreement? Or is there something about the word table that contains the essence of the table? So now I'm going to tell you something that if you don't know is going to blow your mind. And if you do know, it'll remind you of when your mind was blown when you first learned it. Okay? The word devar. The word devar in Hebrew means speech. Ani medaber. I'm speaking. Eseret hadibrot. The 10 proclamations. But the word devar doesn't only mean word or speech, it also means thing. Because when you say the word, that is the beginning of the creation of the thing that you said. There is an intrinsic, essential, ontological, I said that word, ontological relationship between speech and reality. It's not just conventional for the priests. So abracadabra is the Aramaic for I will create as I speak. That DBR is here the DVR of Devar, right? Bereshit bara Elohim in the beginning or when God began creating. Bara is create. Dabra, daber is speech. Hoc est corpus. This is hocus pocus. The Christians took the priestly theology from Leviticus, and that is what informs Jesus and the vicarious atonement of his sacrifice, and communion. So when a priest says this is the body, when he has the bread in his hand, hoc est corpus is Latin for this is the body. And through the words, the Catholics, but not the Protestants, believe that the very essence of that bread invisibly, mysteriously transforms into the body and then the wine to the blood of Christ. That's called transubstantiation. The Protestants said, no, 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 it's just symbolic. It's consubstantiation, not transubstantiation. But it's what is the root of this dispute between the Catholics and the Protestants around communion is the same philosophical tension between the Mosaic Torah and the priestly Torah. How many of you have been to graduation this season? All right, I don't see any hands, but I'm assuming somebody's been to graduation. Okay, what actually makes someone a graduate is not the diploma. It's when the principal of the school or the president of the university says something like, by the power vested in me through the elders of this institution, you are now graduates of this class. That is a remnant or a vestige, a residual of this idea that words create new realities. Okay, we're going to get to where it makes a difference in a second. Blessings. I started this whole investigation because when Isaac got duped to give the blessing to Jacob and not Esau, a buddy of mine, Jonathan Lappin, said, Shai, why didn't Isaac just retract the blessing that he had been duped into giving Jacob and give it to Isaac? And I said, well, because once you say something, it creates a new reality that can't be undone in the biblical worldview. I should have said in the priestly worldview, but he wouldn't have understood that. But I'm saying it to you. And what he said was, that's stupid. And I can see why he said that. Because it's not our philosophy. It's not our ontology. It's not our understanding of language. It's not our reality. But in the Bible, vows cannot be broken. Where does this make a big difference? For marriage. Because the man says to the woman, Harayat mikudeshet li, you are betrothed to me according to the laws of Moses and Israel. And because his words created the bond, his words have to loosen the bond. And only his words. And so that's why there are agunot. That's why there are straw widows who are languishing because their jerk husbands won't release them from the marriage. And they're the ones, the husbands are the ones who have to say those words, write her a get, or write me a get for her. That's the only way a marriage can be dissolved. Now, what this does is it creates a scenario where there can be injustices. And here's how the rabbis dealt with husbands who were unjust. This is in the Talmud. And similarly, you find with bills of divorce for women and bills of manumission, if the man refuses to give the bill of manumission of freedom to the slave or a bill of divorce, even when the court says it's time, you should do this, they beat him. They take a stick, not of a carrot, a mamish stick, and they beat him until he says, Ani rotze, I want. Today, our rabbis are a bunch of cowards. Because you either need to say, this reflects a philosophy of language that we no longer accept. Or you need to beat the guy until he says, I submit, I want. So then the Talmud goes ahead and asks, but wait a second, that's coercion, right? We're all attorneys in the world of the Talmud, right? You can't force a confession. You can't force a get. And the answer is, look, it's because we say, and this is the truth in the priestly world, matters that remain in the heart, and in the heart means in the mind, right? When you love the Lord your God with all your heart, it doesn't mean emotional, it means intellectual and emotional. So in the priestly Torah, intention is irrelevant. And so as long as he says the words, write her a get, that is what changes the woman's status. It's pretty wild. But if you don't understand the philosophy of language that lies behind this ontology, this philosophy, then it just seems, it does seem stupid. But I hope that now that you see the philosophy that lies behind it, oh, okay, I don't agree with it, but at least I understand it now. And let's take a look at another example of this. Ah, okay. So in the priestly Torah that was bequeathed to rabbinic Judaism after the temple was destroyed, you have elements of the priestly ontology, the priestly Torah, in these three categories: time, personal status, and laws of separation. Why is it that a violation of Shabbat intentionally merits the death penalty? Because that in the priestly Torah, once you've caused damage to the universe as a result of your intentional transgression, the only antidote for that intentional transgression is a blood sacrifice. It's the only antidote. It's the only way to repair the damage of the transgression. Okay. Marriage and speech for personal status, we looked at that. Divorce and speech. There's a hierarchy in this priestly world. There's the high priest and the Levite and the Israelite and the mumser, right? The illegitimate child, and the Gentile. And it is a pyramid, or it is a ladder, right? And the ones on the bottom have less holiness. So as much as I appreciate the theology of the priestly Torah, there are other aspects of the priestly Torah that I'm being dramatic by calling demonic. And the situation that straw widows are in is an example of that demonism. Okay. Let me talk about this, and then I want to take questions. It's a good time to take questions. The rabbis inherit the entire Hebrew Bible. They take some stuff from the Mosaic Torah, and they take some stuff from the priestly Torah. I just showed you in the last slide what they took from the priestly Torah, but in the majority of cases, the rabbis preferred to adopt the Mosaic worldview, not the priestly worldview. And the place where you see this in, I think, a funny and an amusing way is better to be a learned mumser, a mumser who knows Torah, than an ignorant high priest. And so that lets you know that in the Mosaic world, what makes you a leader is your Torah knowledge. And in the priestly world, what makes you a leader is your daddy and who your daddy was, and your yichus, your pedigree. The rabbis are self-made men, The rabbis are Torah Jews, and they are promoting Talmud Torah, the learning of Torah for those in their community. Okay, questions? Okay.
I have one question.
Okay, James.
You said the power of speech creates things. Um, you look at the story of creation, it's all done by speech. He says, let there be light, So the whole
Yeah,
story is based on speech, the creation of speech.
yeah. Thank you. I'm sorry I didn't say that, James. Thank you so much for reminding me.
And,
And and embedded in that creation story is the separation, right? There's all these different separations, day and night, earth and water, different kinds of animals, male and female. Yes, that's the priestly worldview. Genesis 1 is a priestly document.
and also Lashon Hara, basically through your speech, you create the wrong thing. So the power of Lashon Hara, because it comes through speech.
Yep. And under the chuppah, that's what I tell the chassan and kala, is that just like speech has the power to create worlds, be careful of what you say because speech has the potential to destroy worlds as well. Marcia, do you have your hand up, my dear?
I do. Um, so I'm just thinking about Torah authorship and the relationship between Moses and Aaron. That obviously the characters of Moses and Aaron, the fact that they're brothers, and one is, I know when we say Mosaic Torah, we're not actually talking about Moses. However, it's hard to, I mean, the fact that Moses and Aaron share parents and one represents priesthood and one represents um, a different kind of different way of
Torah.
understanding. I'm just wondering, am I reading too much into that brotherly dynamic?
I don't know, but I love it. I absolutely love it, Yashakoach. I think it's a beautiful way to imagine what the rabbis are going to end up doing, which is to embrace the common denominator between the Mosaic religion and the priestly religion, and let Moses and Aaron, as you are personifying them in a beautiful way, thank you, let them think and believe what they want. What we're going to The way in which we're going to keep our people unified is through a uniformity of practice, not a uniformity of belief. Beautiful. And you can see it in the family too. Like you think you think your way, you think, the other way, but can we just eat at the same table? Can we just share a meal together? That's it. So speaking of sharing a meal together, kashrut is in the priestly Torah. It's in Leviticus. For those of you who have a kosher kitchen or keep kosher, you may very well be familiar with the 1/60th rule. That is, if the volume of meat accidentally enters a milk dish, and the volume of that accidental meat entry is less
Uh,
than 1/60th of the total milk pot, then it has been nullified. And don't worry about it. That is completely Mosaic. It's not from the Bible, right? The rabbis are just being practical, and not everything in Judaism is practical. And what they're saying is that if it was unintentional and negligible, then just consider it nullified. But there's always going to be a priestly voice. There's always going to be somebody in the rabbinic period who says, wait a second, that's not what the Torah meant, which I believe they're correct. It's not what the Torah meant. And so in the Tosefta, which is a companion volume to the Mishnah, there's a position that a forbidden piece of meat, right? It's not milk and meat, but it's like if pork enters a beef stew and it gets all mixed up, even if the ratio is 1 to 1,000, it's all forbidden. That is not the halakha. That is not the halakha, but that is a position that has been preserved in the Tosefta, this companion document to the Mishnah, and it preserves the priestly worldview. There is one time of the year when we adopt the priestly worldview for kashrut. Boom, 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 boom. Passover. If there's just a little speck of chumetz, chutza, right? It's out, it's treif, you can't do anything about it. That's the one time of the year where we nod to the priestly Torah of kashrut. Marcia. Oh, Marcia, you still have your hand up, or is that still from the old first one?
Sorry, that was the first one. Forgive me.
Okay, I lowered it. Forgiven. All right. Mark.
My question is in the chat.
I don't read the chat. Could you read your question, please?
Oh, okay. You don't read the chat. No wonder I've not been able to ask any questions on chat. Okay, is there any correspondence between the priestly punishment for moral impurity, as you outlined here, and the reason God expelled Adam and Eve from divine land of paradise?
Great question. So the author of the Garden of Eden narrative was not part of the priestly school.
Right.
But you can absolutely understand the exile from the Garden of Eden in priestly terms, which you have done and suggested that we consider it. So it is unclear to me at this moment what the author of the Garden of Eden story understood the exile to be. I can tell you what the Zohar understood the exile to be. I can tell you what rabbinic Jews understood it to be with my historical lens, but why Adam and Eve were not killed, which was what the punishment for an intentional transgression was meant to be, why they were only exiled is not clear to me. I can tell you that for the rabbis, the answer was clear as day to them. Adam and Eve did tshuva. And as a result of their tshuva, they were not killed. They were still punished, but they had a lesser punishment, and that was exile.
Yeah, I get the impression that in the Garden of Eden, the question of morality was the direct relationship between God and the individual. Whereas I think that the rabbinic movement basically insinuated themselves between people and God, and in a sense began to assume the role of being God's chosen authority rather than a direct relationship between God and people.
Well, that relationship between God and people gets mediated already in the book of Exodus. So it's 1,000 years before the rabbis.
Right. And I think it was written specifically to give rabbis and priests that level of authority.
Uh-huh. Absolutely, because it was probably written by priests and then
Right.
projected back. Yeah. So
Right.
sure
So
that's
it justifies their authority.
yeah.
Whereas in Adam and Eve, God was upset with Adam and Eve, not because of the clothing. It's the clothing which represents their unwillingness to be open to God, to hide their feelings and themselves from God. And so God said,
Yashikoach.
go out there and get it straightened out.
Yashikoach. Thank you. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
All right. So in the theology, you have different anthropologies, understandings of human beings. So I've already mentioned this. You can take a look at this. Amos is really representing the Mosaic point of view, and he's using national language, right? To me, Israelites are just like the Ethiopians, right? Just like I'm the God of you guys, I'm the God of them too. We're still the chosen people. But for the priests, being chosen is an essential quality that gives us a level of holiness. Not so for the Mosaic Torah. We're still chosen, but we're not essentially any different than anybody else. We just have a special relationship with God. Our relationship is different, not our persons. Okay. Let's skip this. Okay. So here's a halachic consequence of this priestly understanding of Jews. So in the 16th century, a criminal who transgressed on a communal decree or any transgression, like murder, any transgression, if he hasn't been excommunicated, he counts in a minion. This is now an early 20th century comment by the Mishnah Berurah on the Shulchan Aruch. And he's quoting the first part of the Shulchan Aruch. Even if the crime he committed was a capital offense, he can be counted in a minion. Why? A Jew who has sinned is still a Jew, and his holiness endures. But someone who doesn't acknowledge the divinity of Torah Shebaal Peh, the oral Torah, is not to be included in the counting of the 10. So let me explain this. I am not counted in a minion, but a murderer is. And so that's a result of two things. The priestly anthropology that understands that Jews have an inherent holiness, and a polemic against the modern study of Judaism that has concluded that the oral Torah was a product of the rabbis and subsequent generations and was not given to Moses at Mount Sinai alongside the written Torah. Another one of these consequences, which I just find so funny, is that if siblings both convert, halachically they can marry each other because they're no longer brother and sister. They're completely new people. The rabbis said, don't do it. No, we don't like that. But according to the halakha and according to logic, right? If once they come up out of the mikveh, they don't share parents anymore, then they don't share parents anymore. Then they're not brother and sister. Okay. And that's a function of this priestly ontology. Okay, Ria. Ria, you got,
Can you hear me?
yeah, speak up, please.
Okay. I was under the impression that there was not the concept of excommunication in Judaism, but there's a cherev, which Spinoza was under, removal from the community, but that person's always Jewish. So which is it?
There's no difference in my understanding. Excommunication means you're not part of the community. They're still Jewish. There's nothing you can do to not be Jewish.
Yeah, but say if you're
Harem is
excommunicated from
excommunication.
church, from that you're no longer Christian. You know what I mean?
So that's not my understanding. I don't know
Oh.
anything about Christianity, so I'm going to keep my mouth shut about Christianity.
Oh.
In Judaism, you can't be part of the community. That's what being put in harem means. And I was under the impression that's what excommunication means,
and I
that
thought
you
it
are
was
outside
different.
the community.
Yeah, I thought it was different. So
Okay, Mark.
yeah, anyway, okay, thanks.
Thank you.
I had the impression that the endless layers of control of the rabbinic community over Jews is one of the reasons that gave rise to Christianity, which restored the relationship of the individual to God as it was originally stated in Genesis.
Yeah, I don't think I want to talk about that except to just say that I really disagree. And um, it's Christianity that is much more priestly and biblical, and the priest is literally the intermediary between the individual and God. Um, so let me leave it at that. Okay. Once the temple is destroyed, then you need to find a functional substitution for what the animals had been providing for the community as a result of their sacrifice, which was vicarious atonement. So in Christianity, right, Jesus becomes the one who um, the one who incurs sacrifice, death, as a result of, or in order to vicariously atone for other people's transgressions. We had the same problem, and we came up with these 5 categories of mitzvot in order to fulfill the functions that sacrifices had when the temple was around. Halachically, Jews, halachically, we do not have the idea of original sin, although there have been many, many, many rabbis and many, many, many Jews who have believed original sin and it has influenced their Judaism. But if it's in the prayer book, that means it's a consensus for Jews. And in the prayer book, we have Eloheinu shema shenatata bi tehorahi. We say this every morning. God gave us pure souls. If there's any schmutz on our souls, it's not because we inherited a schmutzy soul. It's because we did something to schmutzify our souls. Okay. Still in the rabbinic period, this is an incredible scene in the Talmud where Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha, who's understood to be the high priest, goes into the Holy of Holies to offer incense. And he sees some manifestation of God. A katriel Yah. Keter is crown, so I will crown Yah. Unclear. Seated on a high and exalted throne. God says, Yishmael, my son, bless me. I said to God, may it be your will that your mercy overcome your anger, and may your mercy prevail over your other attributes, and may you act toward your children with the attribute of Rahmanas, and may you enter before them beyond the letter of the law. And the Holy One nodded God's head. So 2 things. God wants or needs our blessing. It's Talmudic. It's also biblical, but here you see it very explicitly. And there is an opposition between Rahmanas on one side and Deen, strict justice, on the other side. These 2 things are in tension throughout rabbinic literature. And if anybody has seen the Israeli Supreme Court building, they represented justice with straight lines, and they represented compassion and mercy with curves. And so there's this really intentional architecture that combines straight lines and curves. Okay. Our deeds, right? God needs our blessing. And what we do in this stream of rabbinic thought, we're still in the world of the rabbis, what we do affects God. This is the Midrash, the essential home of the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah is the divine presence in the world. The essential home is in the lower worlds. But when Adam sinned, it moved up to the first heaven. And when Cain sinned, it went up to the second heaven. And so on until it went up to the 7th heaven. and God was no longer in our world. But then the Midrash reverses the process with the introduction of Abraham and concludes the process with Moshe. And finally, with Moshe, God returns, or the Shekhinah returns from the seventh heaven down to the lower worlds. So this is a rabbinic language to say that what we do necessarily moves or affects, impacts God's presence in the world. This is priestly. This is priestly. Okay. This is in that same universe of what we do affects God, but it isn't about, it's not using a metaphor of distance, it's using a metaphor of strength. When Israel does God's will, they turn God's left hand, which is weak, into the right hand. So God's got two right hands. How do they get this? Your right hand, this is from the Song of the Sea. This is the Egyptians are chasing the Israelites. The Israelites are marching through the dry land in the Red Sea. Your right hand, God, is glorious in power. Power. Your right hand, Lord, shatters the enemy. Oh, you've got two right hands. You've got a right hand in the first sentence and a right hand in the second sentence. Now, obviously, this is not what the Torah means, but this is how the rabbis, very early, this is a 3rd century midrash. This is how the rabbis are putting, imposing, projecting their theology into the Bible. Okay? And then they flip it around. But when the Israelites don't do the will of God, as it were, they turn the right hand into the left hand. This is from the book of Lamentations that describes the destruction of the temple by the Babylonians. God has withdrawn his right hand, thereby weakening God. So what I've tried to do is give you a constellation of rabbinic midrashim that embody the theology of the priestly Torah. Okay. I wanted to give you, how are we doing on time? Okay. I wanted to show you that there are some really crystal clear examples of these two philosophies clashing in the Talmud. And when you don't understand the philosophy, you think that Rabbi Eliezer is a complete jerk. He's not. None of the rabbis are jerks. But if they're operating on a different philosophical worldview, then they're doing the only thing they can. So here's the case. A woman was eating special priest food because she's married to a priest. And while she's eating, somebody runs in the house and says, your husband just died, or your husband just divorced you. That means that for that meal that she has been eating, she wasn't entitled to eat it because she wasn't a priest's wife anymore. Rabbi Eliezer obligates her to return the amount plus a 20% penalty. Rabbi Joshua exempts them from consequence. Rabbi Eliezer is channeling the priestly Torah. There's been damage to the world. The only way to reverse the damage, to heal the damage, is by returning the truma, the special priest food, with a 20% penalty. Rabbi Joshua is a Mosaic Torah guy. No harm, no foul. She didn't know she was committing any kind of transgression. She shouldn't be punished for that. Okay. If you don't know about these two philosophies, you look at this, and what do you say about Rabbi Eliezer? That he's legalistic. This is what gives Judaism, this is exactly what gives Judaism the reputation of being Talmudic, of being more concerned with the letter of the law than the spirit of the law. And from the outside, it's not an unreasonable charge. But once you understand what's going on philosophically, oh, it's like their hands are tied. Okay, I'm going to skip the next one, which is really fascinating. Marcia, invite me back. I'll just teach this. Okay, so I want to define our terms. Theology is what we think about God and how God relates to the world. It's God talk. Religion is given our theology, given what we think about God and how God relates to the world. How should we behave? And how we should behave in Hebrew is called halakha. From the time the Torah was stitched together and canonized, there were multiple theologies. The two main ones were priestly and Mosaic. They are mutually exclusive. But both theologies promote a religion of mitzvot. That's their common denominator. Let's read the quote on the right. A detailed study of the entire Mishnah shows that ostensibly doctrinal matters, what I've been calling philosophy or theology, are consistently addressed in the language of mitzvot, of practice. This is now my writing. For a widely dispersed people, the rabbis chose the strategy of uniformity of distinctive practice rather than uniformity of belief to preserve our national identity. That's how they did it. And guess what, guys? It worked. It is absolutely mind-blowing. The rabbis' strategy for how to keep the Jews alive when they didn't share a piece of land, a piece of real estate, they didn't share currency, they didn't share a language, they didn't have an army. For 1,800 years, it was the halakha that kept us together. So a little bit of anti-Semitism helped keep us together, but I'm not giving anti-Semitism that much credit. It was the halakha. This is the smoking gun midrash to the idea that the deed is more important than the creed. When God found out that the Israelites had abandoned God and Torah, God cried, better that they would have abandoned me, God, theology, but kept my Torah, the religion, the mitzvot. Why? Because through engaging in mitzvot, the light of the Torah will return these wayward Jews to God. That's the psychology, and that's if Judaism has a dogma, it's it. This is it, deed over creed. Okay. All right, we're wrapping up very soon. In the Middle Ages, we're now going to the Middle Ages. It's no longer priestly Torah in rabbinic clothes and Mosaic Torah in rabbinic clothes. It's Jewish philosophy and mysticism. And they're going at it just like Hillel and Shammai and just like the priests and the Mosaics. In the philosophical world, God is beyond our ability to even imagine. Nothing we do affects God. God has no needs. And the mitzvot are all for us. They're all for us. In Jewish mysticism, God is beyond, but God is also in the world and within us. God has needs, and we can fulfill those needs through the mitzvot with the proper intention. And the primary function of mitzvot is to help God. We are the beneficiaries of God being united. And let's take a look at what I mean by united. In a second. Okay. So the philosophers adopt the Mosaic Torah, but they don't believe it. Maimonides is quite clear that God does not cause rain to fall depending on our behavior. God has no needs. God has no reaction to human behavior. God has no knowledge of individuals. God is completely transcendent, this impersonal force which exists beyond our comprehension. God doesn't respond. God doesn't hear petitionary prayers, doesn't respond. God can't speak. And revelation and prophecy emerge from the prophet's intellect and imagination. So for Maimonides, the Torah is juvenile literature. It's to help keep immature adults behaving properly so that the philosophers can have the time and freedom and leisure to study Aristotle. The mystics, when I said to keep God together, it's this. So this is the Sfirot. This is the Shekhinah, the divine presence in our world, according to the rabbis. For the mystics, it is the mediating element of God that allows God's blessings to flow from the upper worlds to our world when there is connection. You see, there's connections everywhere else, but there's no connection between Yesod and Shekhinah. How does that connection happen? Through Jewish men doing the mitzvot with the proper mystical intention. This idea of the Sfirot and the bringing together of the Sfirot begins in 12th century France with a book called the Bahir. And Korban, which means sacrifice in Hebrew, is made up of the root that means to bring near. So according to the Bahir, through sacrifice, the Israelites bring near to one another the holy forms, a reference to the Sfirot. So we have God's future. We have God's power in our hands. We have control of God in our hands. Bring for you each one near to one another to be one tree, the tree of life, and they will be unified through your hands. Just like the Sfirot can be unified through our hands, transgressions of the mitzvot cause a disjunction or a decoupling, and that is when really bad things happen. So the two things that I want to take out of Jewish mysticism are the world of relationships and connections and the idea that God is immanent in the world. For the mystics, when you say Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, they think not Echad, one, but Iched, unify, make one, unite. That when we say the Shema, what we're doing is connecting the Yesod and the Malchut, right? They have different names, but the Malchut is the same as the Shekhinah. Okay, two more and then we're done. Kabbalah is developed in Sfat in the 16th century in the generations after the Spanish exile. If you're using the Mosaic theology, the exile from Spain, which was a catastrophe, the likes of which Jews hadn't experienced since the destruction of the temple, the exile from Spain must have been a punishment for something we did wrong. So we need to do tshuva. Lurianic Kabbalah emerges from the descendants of the Spanish exile who were convinced that we need to up the halachic ante. The only weapon in the hand of man when he tries to assist the divine power in its mythological war against evil are the ethical and religious mitzvot from the halakha. And they created many new demands and customs from the Tzvat community. Every good deed always frees a spark of divine power, and every sin always strengthens evil. But here's the crux. Everything affects God. Not just good stuff and bad stuff, but even idleness and idle thoughts strengthen evil. We're no longer on a level playing field. When you're not engaged in mitzvot, the demons are being empowered. I'll send this to you. Mm. I wanted to talk about the reason why there's so much halakha. You can read this on your own. This is the explanation for why people in Sfat and subsequent Kabbalists found the need to increase the number of commandments and stringencies. The more the pollution of the stake is manifest, the greater the need for fences around transgressions. It's necessary to add more prohibitions. This was the most famous book for 200 years in the Jewish world. Okay. This is what's salvageable, my friends. The priestly theology of natural consequences, the Mosaic anthropology of equality of human beings, the rabbinic religion of mitzvot, a respect for the benefits and limits of rationalism from medieval philosophy, and an emphasis on relational dynamics and divine immanence from Kabbalah. We just need to be able to put it together in a way that is a compelling Torah for today. Happy to take questions and comments.
I'm gonna step in. I just want to say, first of all, fascinating in every way. I can't wait to watch this again. I would just want to encourage everybody here, if they have the patience, to go back and watch this on YouTube, because you basically got like an entire semester of a lot of stuff today. So my head is swimming. I want to say thank you. I cannot wait till you come back. I hope my friends feel the same way. I want to tell you what's coming up. In July, Suzanne Singer is coming back for a few sessions, Rabbi Suzanne Singer, focusing on a deep dive into the theology of a few select prophets that we don't often spend a lot of time with. This is something she's really interested in, so we're going to do a prophetic. But then what's really exciting, I want to share my screen, is that in August, my friend Rabbi Karen Aviv out of Denver just wrote this book, and she's going to actually take us through it in a period of 4 weeks. I just want you to look at this. She's just a wonderful teacher. She wrote a book. She's sort of doing the Unlearning Jewish Anxiety, How to Live with More Joy and Less Suffering. And I actually think she's been working on this for years. I think the timing of it, when the whole world is just riddled with anxiety for so many reasons, it's been it was just very timely. So that we're gonna sort of, and you can buy the book very easily, but it'll still be a great, even if you don't, I think you'll really enjoy Karen. So she's our August scholar, and then September we will stay tuned for some of the other. Whether it's one of our regulars, our sort of resident scholars, or it's a new face, but you'll see. But please join us. We are taking a summer vacation. No ALI next week, no ALI the week after. We come back in July, and I hope to see all of you. I love having you here. And again, thank you for everything you do to make this possible. You can find us on the website, and there's other things that you can do with the collaborative. If you have other needs, we'd love to see you. And now you can ask Shai whatever questions you have.
And I'm going to send Marcia my email address if anybody has questions they want to ask me offline, and the PowerPoint from today. Any questions, comments?